Hey everybody, this is Eli and welcome back to Elfbait. So it's been a long time since I've actually done an update on my Monday game, which is the new campaign for 2018. Now we've had a lot of sessions, we had a bit of a gap for a couple of weeks while we had a player out, but there's been quite a lot that's gone on since they answered the call for aid from the Smith back in Himley, and they have actually stumbled into a deeper mystery. So there's been a lot of sessions between now and then, so I figured I'd want to get caught up because I kind of hit the next leg of the campaign, which is more dungeon crawly, and so want to be able to get caught up, get you folks caught up before they start trundling through on that. There's a lot to cover, so I'm going to probably be a bit more brief than I would if I was covering this more frequently. So but let me go ahead and jump it in. So really, if you recall, they had gone to Himley, they had run into a smith who, his metals had been soured, and so the village was up in arms about him. They did some investigating and found out that he was being menaced by a Korrid. They had gone and confronted the Korrid. He wasn't willing to budge on giving up the girl, giving up the smith's daughter, which evidently was the crux of the matter, is that back in his youth, the smith had promised the Korrid his daughter, his firstborn daughter, upon her 12th birthday. And so that time had come, and the smith, of course, now having had a kid and been a father and having lost his wife and stuff, wasn't willing to give up his child. You know, indiscretions of youth come back to haunt him. Anyways, they go off. The party goes off to confront the Korrid. They do so underneath this ancient oak tree that actually has a kind of a throne built into it in the middle of this grove, kind of an eerie sort of old fairy spot. They managed to defeat him. He's actually pretty easy to defeat, and while they're trying to question him, he disappears in a cloud of ravens. After screaming about her wanting the child, some other female presence wanting the smith's daughter. So that's where we left off. Last update. So if you recall, the party is Volen, the orc ranger. In this campaign, there are no half-orcs. In this campaign world, there's no half-orcs. So we're using half-orc stats for weaker orcs who have been exiled from their tribes. And this is sort of a semi-common thing in the wilderness lands of Tronvold, which is this frontier principality. Well, when I say frontier, it's on the edge of the kingdom. It's the least settled of many of the locations. It's not as built up. It's got one city. So that's Valen. She is the orc ranger. We have Erden, the dwarven fighter. There is Zaval, who is a changeling warlock. In this campaign, we're not using hybridized races, but we are keeping the stats in the game. So instead of having half-elves, we have changelings, which are humans with fey blood, or who may even actually have been taken away and kept in the land of fairy or something, and then returned as children or something to that effect. But basically, they have fey attributes amongst them, so they now Zaval is blind. He is, but he has a odd version of blind sight. So we gave him the blind sight ability, but he is blind. He's visible. He has no visual acuity, and his blind sight only operates out to 60 feet, and then beyond that, he's just dead blind. The rest of the character lineup is, we have Alwyn, the elven healer. He's a life cleric. And then we have Ilan, who is Alwyn is a wood elf life cleric, and we have Ilan, who is a high elf wizard, sort of an academic sort. In this campaign setting, the elves are in decline. I'm making it, I geared it up to be sort of a bit of a more low fantasy. Anyways, that is just kind of a refresher on the party. So they get back to Himley, and their concerns that destroying the tokens that they found tied to the old oak would somehow undo a bunch of a bunch of deals or something like that. That ended up being false, so they're happy with that. The Smith, while he's not thrilled that the Korred got away, it seems clear that the Korred is finished, so the party's reasonably happy, or reasonably content at least, with that outcome. So the Smith goes about his business. We do some downtime in the game, and so then as everybody is kind of in their downtime, Volene is getting ready to pack up her camp. She usually camps in the lawn across the way from the herbalist's shop in town. She's getting ready to pack up her camp and return to her cabin in a nearby wood where she lives alone. She's sort of a friend of the villages, local villages, but she does tend to live by herself. She's approached by the herbalist, who says that he has a package that he needs delivered to Goodmead Monastery, which is a few days away. There's a monk there who has requested a special salve, and it's sort of a discreet delivery. So Volene, who is just about ready to leave, she goes and kind of decides to go back to the local tavern. There is no sleepover inn in Himley. Himley is small enough to where there is a tavern, but there is no inn. She goes there. Erden is back to hanging out. He had kind of sobered up for the adventure, but now that he's unoccupied, he has gone back into his cups. And so Zaval is kind of hanging out there too, waiting to figure out what his next leg in his journey is. Zaval is kind of he's on a quest for information. He's looking for insight into his patron, his elemental patron. And so there's a bit of a roundabout. The party gets back together. They're not quite a party yet. I mean, at this point they'd helped out the Smith, which was kind of an ad hoc thing. But they all come together and they decide, okay, well, they're going to go to the monastery. So, I mean, and part of this is, Zaval figures that a monastery is going to have a library. Elan also is attracted to the concept of a library, and Alwyn, who is trying to do good with his remaining time in the world, is intrigued by checking out what the holy places of humans are like, so he's going to go there as well. Erden kind of goes along for the ride, or was kind of going to go along for the ride, but when he found out that this is going to be Goodmead Monastery, which is famous for its mead, thus the name, that perked his interest, and so off they go. So they travel along the road. It's uneventful. Tronvold, the roads are pretty quiet. I mean, seldom are you going to get harassed unless you travel by night. They're careful. They make it there. As they're coming about the turn one encounter they did have, though, is they did have an encounter with a jailer's wagon thundering down the road, presumably towards Castle Gorgon, which is the local stronghold that also operates as the Prince of Tronvold's jail. But it was just a chance encounter, just a bit of a character. So as they're turning the corner to head off the main road up the road towards Goodmead, they encounter a sort of a beggar, peddler monk sitting on the corner, asking for coin. They do some checks, and it turns out that this guy is kind of sketchy, so they really don't give him much. They actually just kind of point him up the road and say, hey, there's a monastery just up there. If you're looking for work and a room and stuff, I'm sure they'd be willing to give it to you. And their suspicions are confirmed when he sort of plays it off and poo-poos it, and it's clear that he's not what he says he is. So they get to Goodmead. And there's quite a bit of role play here, some interaction with the priests. They meet sort of the facilitator, one of the administrative priests of the monastery. It is a co-ed monastery, so we have sisters and brothers working together here. This is a fantasy world, so I didn't want to make it just like real world, cloisters or anything like that. But also, just why not? So they do encounter, they ask around and they find Brother Volstan. Now, as they're doing so, it's, the smell of brewing and distilling is in the air. There are bees, even though this is the fall that that the campaign started in, there are still bees about, which is sort of a hint that Perhaps the monastery may be a bit of a special place. There's still bees that are out and active, even though the air is chill. But one other feature they notice is the monastery is up on a big hill, and the road kind of winds up, and there's sort of a ad hoc village built along the road. And this is where the non-members of the monastery who are still attached to the monastery live. There's not a village right there, and the nearest villages are like a couple days away. So these are the folks, sort of the resident workers who are not members of the brotherhood, sisterhood, members of the order. But also along one side of this road and kind of going down the hill, there are several graves, or there's actually a cemetery. And they notice that some of the graves have been turned. And so it kind of gets a bit of a suspicion going on. But they meet with Volstan. He's sort of an interesting character. The party doesn't quite know what to make of him. He is sort of a boisterous individual, kind of a bit pocky in the face, overweight, smells a bit of both brew and BO. But they make their trade. They give him his parcel, and he produces coin from under his robes, so he's carrying coin on him. One of the party members who's curious about this manages to notice that he has a knife up his sleeve. So they're now a little bit guarded about this guy. He's clearly not just your average monk. But there's some social interaction at this point. The party kind of disperses. Volen goes off to examine the herb garden. Volen is very much an herbalist herself. She goes off to examine their herb garden. Erden wanders off with Volstan to actually get a sample of his brew. Ilan and Alwyn go off to do their stuff. Ilan goes to the library. Zaval also goes to the library, but they're looking at very different things. And Alwyn, the cleric, he is spending some time in contemplation, learning, talking with the rest of the priests, kind of sharing faith. This is actually something he was doing back in Himley. He was actually talking to the local non-magical priest, basically just a member of the order who was an official of the local agricultural god, or goddess, excuse me. And so they spend some time here, and Erden is chatting up with Volstan, and learns that Volstan actually has sort of a new experimental brew that he'd like to get the dwarves' expert opinion on. Dwarves are known for their appreciation of fine drink, especially the more robust versions, ales and beers and meads. And so he takes Erden off through the orchards to his little cottage, which is actually outside of the monastery walls, on its own, and treats him to some of his own liquor. So time passes, night falls, the players are off doing their various things. They're invited to stay. They've been given rooms in the guest quarters. They've been invited to meals. And so on his way back from Volstan's hovel, his little hut, out on his own, his little cottage, Erden notices some activity down in the graveyard. And they had learned earlier in talking with the priests that somebody had been desecrating the graves, some of the graves in the graveyard in the cemetery there. So Erden takes notice that there's some activity down in the graveyard late at night, and so he looks and notices that there appear to be a group of goblins that have kind of woven their way through the headstones in the graves and are digging up a grave. They're actually well in the process of digging up the grave by the time he gets there. He looks around. There's nobody around. He had heard from the monks that they had been leaving a sentry out, just one of the order, in and about the house or about the monastery. But he doesn't seem to be alerted to this, and so Erden heads on. He actually decides to take it upon himself to stop the goblin. So he charges down there and starts fighting these goblins on his own. So this is a first level dwarf fighter, and there are 4 goblins down there. Looks like 3 goblins and a leader. And so he charges in headlong on his own. He's going to go ahead and take him on. Actually, I believe it was 5 goblins. But so he's fighting. About 2 rounds of combat go before the sentry is alerted to the catches wind of the combat. And so he actually sounds the alarm. So the rest of the party who's at dinner hears the alarm going off, and they come out and reach the cemetery, reach the graveyard, just as Erden goes down to 0 hit points, and Erden falls into the grave. Party approaches, and they see what looks to be the leader of the goblins kind of drop his shovel, and he actually kind of hunkers down over the grave, and he's getting down, and he's reaching behind him, and he pulls out this wicked blade, and he's just, one of the only remaining goblin that's still there, or one of the 2 remaining goblins that's with him, is keeping an eye out, making sure this goblin lowers himself in. So the rest of the party then at that point comes to Erden's rescue. Zaval and Elan stay back and are providing spell coverage, while Volen charges in. Alwyn also charges in. He's got a warhammer. So they engage in the goblins in combat. They manage to actually defeat the goblins and manage to kill them before they end up doing an Erden. But as they're at the last minute, a group of wargs are summoned they come in from out of the darkness. One of the goblins grabs onto one of the wargs, and he's trying to get pulled away. He's not dead yet, and he's trying to hold on to the warg as the warg pulls away. And the rest of the party is kind of really they had a couple of misses there. They're trying to get him, managed to kill him, and the wargs actually speed off. So in the process, Zaval and then the rest of are all gathered around, but Erden is down in the grave, and he's come conscious. When the goblin leader fell on him, I decided that that shook him back to consciousness. He's still at 0 hit points, so he's hurting, but he's not dead. The coffin lid that they're on gives way, cracks, and he falls into the grave with the goblin. So they manage to get the goblin off of him and look down, and the coffin is empty except for a small wrapped parcel. They get down in there and they look around inside the coffin, and it's interesting that they're just like, what is this? So Erden picks up the parcel. He's kind of groggy still, and the parcel unwraps, and a collection of small bones hit the floor of the coffin. They're actually the bones of an infant human, it looks like, and amongst them is the mummified heart of this child. And so the rest of the party's kind of taken aback, like, this is weird. They do some searching around the rest of the grave. Is there any sign of the corpse in there? They do find that there's an odd breeze coming from a rock slab below this, and that intrigues some of the party. Zaval and Elan and Alwyn are kind of interested in this, sort of the academics in the party. The other half of the party is more concerned with the bones and stuff. So they take the bones back to the monastery, and they have those interred laid out in the ossuary. They're trying to make sure that it's one set of bones. While they're there, they go to bed. Next day comes about. They do some checking. The rest of the party is we have a kind of a split. We have Volen and Erden, who are very kind of concerned with what's going on with the heart. At one point, Zaval had tried to pocket the heart, thinking that this was something dark magic-y, and Erden called him on it, and there was sort of a tense moment, but he eventually surrendered the heart, and Erden put it back with the bones. So during the next day, there's some research. Alwyn walks the perimeter of the hill, looking for any signs of caves or anything that might be feeding the breeze that's down there. They did some checking with some magic. using like dancing lights and stuff for some curious effect to try to see if they could, how far they could get them through the crack in the stone. And the stone is very odd. It has no texture. When they touch it, it's super smooth, and managed to get the outside area of it, and the edges are perfectly cut, even though it's been sitting in the ground. This slab is just it's like laser precise, except for this crack, and there's breeze coming up from the crack. So they're sure that there's some sort of passage behind there. So Alwyn the next day is walking the hill trying to find another way in. Ilan is checking the records of the construction of the monastery, looking for any indications that there may have at some point been caves or anything that were found during the construction of the monastery. And so Zaval is looking up lore. He's looking up stuff about, is there anything sort of weird dark magic or anything about that, about the heart. And also they're researching the graves, and they learn that all the graves that have been desecrated in this particular monastery are all graves that belonged to a merchant family that had one point been prominent in Tronvold, excuse me. So Tronvold, being a local principality, there's this merchant family from Cassia, which is a southern kingdom that had sort of settled into the area and was doing quite well. They find out some information on the grave. The grave is actually the grave of the oldest daughter of the last head of the Cassia, the family of the Cassia family, not Cassia, but the Savino family. Savino is the family name. So the Savinos, their oldest daughter. There was some sort of instance with impropriety. She was with child. There was no marriage. There was no father, supposedly, and things went bad. She ended up dead. She was interred in the cemetery here instead of any family plot. But the Savinos there are several Savinos here, so it looks like somebody had been searching for something in a grave. Now the party is at this point not quite convinced that the baby skeleton and the heart were necessarily what the goblins were looking for. They're reasonably sure, but they want to make sure. So after getting all their information on the Savino family, they decide that they're going to go ahead and stake out the graveyard, see if the goblins come back. The goblins do not come back, so they all turn in and they head back to their rooms. And at breakfast the next morning, there's a bit of a commotion. They find out that the ossuary was broken into. The door was hacked open, and the gate was stretched on the other side, so it had been pried open, and the door behind it would have been hacked open. A hole had been hacked into it. The heart is gone. The baby bones are scattered everywhere. And I know the baby bones is kind of morbid, but it's a mystery, and it fits. So they do some searching, and they find that while it wasn't on the plans for the monastery, the trail of the goblins, and this Valen tracks them, goes to a little sally port at the back of the back wall of the monastery. The goblins had gone through that, evidently. They pick up the trail, they follow them, and they track the goblins through the forest, and eventually there's kind of a chase moment. They're trying to catch up with them. They're hoping that maybe the goblins don't have too much of a lead on them. They get to the river's edge, where they see that there had been a boat there. The boat is gone. There's no sign of goblins on the water. They search the area, and they find some botanical remains. Valen identifies that these plants are not native to this area. She's never seen them in the area. She's a wide-ranging, scout, explorer, woodsman, rustic sort. She's never seen these before. So they do a little bit of research back at the monastery. They kind of go back to the monastery. They're a little grumpy. Go back to the monastery, do some research. They find out that they get a little bit more information on the Savinos. They actually track down some of the. They find out the Savino family, after whatever happened with the Savino's daughter, whatever it was, ruined the family. The family left their estate up in Loughlin, which is a riverside town. They had, and really there was just a decline in the local presence, at least. They do track down some of the former employees of the Savino household, though, up in Loughlin, and they do have a chat with one of the handmaidens, one of the maids from the estate, who is now an elderly woman, and they get some information. They learn that the plants that they had found are from Cassia, which is where the Savinos are from, and so they kind of put two and two together that perhaps there's some insight that might be gained by visiting the estate in Loughlin. Meanwhile, Erden is suspicious. Erden is suspicious of Volstan. Volstan's character has been in question the entire game. So Erden has now poked around Volstan's cottage and found that Volstan has a stash of what look like grave goods, rings, buckles, things of value, and a pouch with a family crest. And so he even finds this. He thinks that it's very possible that Volstan may have actually either been in cahoots with the goblins, or has at least been raiding the graves, or at least helping them in taking the grave goods, or something to that effect. So after they regroup, the party decides that the next step that they're going to make is they're going to go to Loughlin and try and check out the Savino estate. There's a confrontational moment, though, where Erden acts on his suspicions about Volstan. He waits for Volstan to come back to his cottage and confronts him about the goods. There's a really cool role play where he kind of calls him out on it. Volstan meets these accusations with laughter and seems amused, and reveals to Erden that the goblins did not indeed steal the child's heart, the mummified child's heart, but that he had swapped the child's heart with a roasted with the roasted heart of a piglet. And the goblins, being too dumb, they didn't realize it. He's kind of, why do you have roasted pig hearts around? He's like, well, they're useful in some medicines and stuff. So he produces the actual heart from a box in his cottage and gives it to Erden to show good faith. When Erden asks him about the grave goods, it's revealed that Volstan, when he makes his deliveries to Castle Gorgon of ale, which the guards at Castle Gorgon appreciate, he spends a little bit of time tarrying there and engaging in games of chance, which he is particularly good at, and comes away with bags full of loot taken off of prisoners as they're interred there. Evidently, the guards like to use this as currency in their games, and so Volstan has accumulated quite the cash of his own. When asked about the family crest, it's revealed that it is actually Volstan's family crest, and that before he was a member of the order, he was something much more. He actually makes a comment, I believe, you should have seen me before I was what I am today. And Erden leaves it at that. They part as friends, or at least, friendly acquaintances, and the party heads off to Loughlin. The journey to Loughlin is, again, along the main roads. It actually takes them back through Himley. They stop off at Himley just to, kind of stay overnight before they head on, because it's going to be a couple of days. While in Himley, they check in with the smith. Turns out there's been no other attempt on his daughter, though kind of the local village idiot / mushroomer. He actually, that's how he turns his trade. He's not the brightest guy, but he knows his mushrooms, and so he wanders around. He has seen some shadowy figures kind of skulking around in the woods, but so far nobody's been taken any action. The party decides at this point they're not going to really waste time dealing with this. There's still still sort of the time-sensitive issue of the goblins, who are clearly in a hurry and fled. So they continue on to Loughlin. On the way to Loughlin, they encounter a cadre of the the local road wardens, or the king's wardens, kind of the rangers of the land on the road, who were a bit interested in the mixed party that they have here. You know, we've got a dwarf, 2 elves, an orc, and a blind man traveling together. You know, there's not the Zaval, while he is a changeling, looks human, so at least there's one human. But elves are kind of recluses in the world, not commonly seen. Dwarves also, they kind of stick to their holds. So Erden being out and about is not a common sight, especially in this part of the civilized area, the kind of the western coastal lands. But they continue on to Lachlan. So when they get to Lachlan, there is they're confronted by 3. I tell them there are 3 inns there. There is the Body Badger, there is the Sow's Trough, and there is the Roasted Crow. And so they pick, you know, kind of Elan goes to the Body Badger. The Body Badger is kind of the upscale gentleman's inn. The Roasted Crow is the low-end bar. It doesn't even have rooms. It's just got a back room with a bunch of cots. But it is, and then, you know, that's where they go. And so what then ensues is an interesting role play. So Elan goes back and just goes to sleep, you know, at his nice inn quarters. Meanwhile, the rest of the party ends up in the Roasted Crow, which is the proprietor of the Roasted Crow is an orc. There's an orc behind the bar, and he's got sort of a gimp-legged goblin serving as his server. While they're sitting there, another goblin blatantly comes into the inn with a wriggling sack over his shoulders, a big old sack that's obviously contains something. So he heads into the back room. At that point, Erden and Alwyn decide that they're going to check this out. So they go around the back, and leaving Valen, Valen and Zaval in the inn there, or at the table still. They go around back and they peek in the windows to the kitchen, and what they see is actually a halfling tied to a chair, and the goblin has got a knife, and he's seems to intent on doing some violence against this halfling. They rush in and actually confront the goblin, 1-2 punch, knock him out, let the halfling go, and he's off. Now, the halfling reveals himself to be a member of one of the... in this world, halflings are river folk. They're sort of like the Roma people, in that they are known to have a reputation for... They have a reputation for being transient and having kind of that, mixed bag of good at doing things, but they also are smugglers and stuff. So in doing so, in rescuing this halfling, this river folk, Erden receives a token, which he is informed can be turned in for a favor amongst the river folk. And so the river folk, he takes off, and then Erden and Alwyn return to the inn, and we gotta go. So they go in, they check out the Sow's Trough, and it's kind of your working class inn. It's down by the waterfront. It's a boisterous place. So they get there kind of right before close, and they turn in. The next day, they get up. They sort of they split their tasks. So Erden decides he's going to go down to the docks and kind of ask around about the Savinos, or actually he's going to ask around and see if anybody's heard from any of the goblins, or seen a boat full of goblins. Now, Alwyn and Zaval accompany him and take up a position kind of on a corner of the docks and put on this sort of, dog and pony show, pretending to be street preachers, basically. We got the blind man and the cleric, right? And so now, meanwhile, Elan is he decides he's going to go on a bit of a shopping spree. He's got some stuff he wants to get, so he's going to do some downtime activity. And Valen says she's going to go check out she's going to go check out and see if she can find out if there are any, if they can find out, anything about the manor. On the top of the hill above Lachlan is the Savino Manor. And so they've been looking to try and match these flowers to the manor to get proof. And they do find that there is actually she finds that there's a wild growth of these flowers in kind of a backwater that connects to the grounds for the manor. Now, while she's there, she sees a boat tucked in amongst the bushes, and she goes over, and it's a little kind of frame and leather boat, and she decides she's going to sabotage it, right? She's going to take it apart, and she notices that there are several sets of footprints that go up the hill towards the manor. While she's doing this, though, somebody takes a shot at her with an arrow. The arrow flies out from somewhere, nicks her, does like 1 point of damage, I think it is. Hits her in the foot. She pursues up the hill through the brambles. Whoever it is she's chasing goes through a side gate to the estate, and she ends up follows him in, and she ends up in the overgrown remains of the old Savino garden. More of those flowers are there, all sorts of plants and stuff just overgrown. And while she's pursuing this goblin through there, she is actually beset upon by 3 twig blights. These little twig blights jump out of the brambles and start attacking, assaulting her. She flees. She tries to ward them off with fire, but they're all over her, so she flees and comes back. So Erden, while he's been down on the docks, speaks to the dockmaster, who's another one of the river folk, and finds out that there is information to be had, but if he wants to come back later, the dockmaster can give him a little bit more information. Meanwhile, Elan, who is wandering around, finds himself at the mercy of Tusk and his goblins from the Roasted Crow. While the rest of the party had been there, they had let slip the mention of the body badger, and so Tusk and his crew had gone to the body badger and asked around about an elf who had stayed there, and because there was an elf amongst the original party, and he had asked around, and they told them yes. Anyways, so they've managed to track Elan down in the streets. So there's a chase that ensues. This is kind of cool. We did this as a skill challenge, and so Elan had ended up using, I think it was nature, insight, and perception to try and get away. He only needed 2 successes to get away because he's been chased by goblins. But his insight revealed that the goblins were having trouble getting across the muddy ground, and so he used that to his advantage. His nature check was able to determine that there was a tree near a wall that would support its weight, but that the goblins would have difficulty getting up. He failed his perception check trying to find another way off the street that he could get through, but it was kind of a fun little moment. So they all regrouped and got their information that Elan actually goes to the jail. It goes to the constable, and he actually finds out that the constable is kind of, meh, did you get away? Are you okay? Sure, okay, just steer clear, it'll blow off. But Erden finds out that the Savinos, that yes, there was a boat full of goblins that had set in the backwater for the estate. They also have learned by this point that the Savinos don't really live here anymore. The manor is mostly abandoned. Occasionally, somebody does show up from time to time. The village assumes that the town assumes that it's almost a town. Looks like it was going to become a town. They actually found out that there's a lot of works that suggest that Lachlan was getting bigger before it crashed. They had just assumed that when the Savinos moved out, it's a major merchant house, that kind of everything just kind of went with them. So now it's just sort of a little smuggler port, trade port, whatever. But they find out that there's been an innkeeper, or not an innkeeper, but a caretaker that comes to the estate from time to time, and that so it is populated, or somebody does check in on the estate, but nobody really lives there. So they decide that they're going to go up and check it out. Volan is shared with the rest of the party that somebody attacked her when she was checking out the boat. So they go up the road, up to the estate, deciding that they're not going to go in through the side gate because that was dangerous and there were twig creatures there. So they go up to the front. As they approach the the estate, and they notice that there is smoke coming out of the chimney. Well, somebody's home. So they are, kind of starting to, they approach the estate. They go through the gates. They actually manage to pry the gates open because the gates are chained. They get up to the estate, big double doors. And that is where we'll leave off today. So they managed to make it to the estate. The adventure, so the exploration of the estate did start, but I think I'll save that for the next update because I think it makes a little bit more sense to have that all fluid. But this is a really fun span of adventure. I mean, this is really the super abridged version. There were some nights where it was just nothing but role play, and so we had a really good time just building character and I had fun building NPCs and building up these NPCs. They interacted with quite a few members of the monastery, which was kind of cool. They interacted with two of the inns that are in Lachlan, but it's going to be interesting to see what they find or what they put together for the Savino estate. Erden hasn't revealed it to the rest of the party that he is carrying the baby's heart, the mummified infant's heart. As far as the rest of the party knows, it was taken by the goblins. So we'll see what happens. Anyways, that was a mouthful. I am sorry, and I apologize if the delivery was a little dry. But there's a lot of information to dump, and like I said, I'm trying to do the abridged version. I'm gonna try and get these updates a little bit more frequently, so they're not so dry, so I can remember more the specific character of the sessions. But yeah, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe. You can email at baittheelf@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter, both as ElfBait as well. As always, thanks for joining me here. Most importantly, though, get out and game, and have a good one.